Hi, I'm Eric Lee with Equity Real Estate. I'm the principal broker for Equity Real Estate and one of the owners as well here in Utah. So, I want to talk about earnest money today. This came up because I saw a video actually from a competing brokerage where they talked about a little bit of earnest money, and it was on such a basic level that it drove me nuts. And I'm like, okay, there is so much more to it than this that people need to understand. So whether this is you as an individual or you're an agent, whether my agent or not, I want you to understand this. Now, here's my background. Here's why I'm bringing this to you. For the last several years, my company has done 1 in 5, 1 in 6 transactions in Utah. We are the largest company by far. You'd have to add up the closings from the second and third place company to equal the amount of volume that we do. So I see a lot of stuff as the principal broker over the whole state. I get to see a lot of junk. So, anyways, I want to go over a little bit more in depth so that everybody has a better understanding of earnest money and how important this is. One of the misunderstandings that I see, and I've even seen it taught, is that earnest money is required for it to be a valid contract. And that is not true. The contract itself has value, and so you don't have to have earnest money. But of course, if you don't have earnest money, it's hard for people to take you seriously. So this is the very first section in the contract. We do the reference date, we put down the buyer, we put down the seller, the property, and we've got in bold here that we agree to deliver no later than 4 calendar days after acceptance, as defined later in a purchase part of the contract here, that we're going to have an earnest money in the amount or deposit in the amount of X amount in the form of X amount, right? Now, what is the standard earnest money? There is no standard. It's all negotiable. A lot of people are still doing $1,000. When we had the bidding wars, not last year, but the 2 or 3 years before that, we could see earnest money. The highest I heard was over $1 million in earnest money, but we would see it $20,000, $50,000 very commonly. So here's what I want to talk about. Is more always better? And it gives us, just this one question gives us a little bit better understanding of earnest money. So let's say that I've got an offer with $5,000 earnest money and another offer with $20,000 earnest money. Is the $20,000 offer inherently better? And the answer is not necessarily. It takes a lot deeper understanding than just looking at that dollar amount to see what the better offer is. And we have to consider a lot of things. One of the things, to keep this video under 5 minutes, which is my goal today, which is hard for me because I like to chat about stuff. I'm passionate about this kind of thing. But one of the things that we look at down here is, okay, so we've got earnest money. How is the finance happening? Is the rest coming in cash? Is it a for sure thing? How for sure is it? One of the biggest things that I wanted to talk about, though, is we jump down here to seller disclosures. Now, the reason that this has to do with earnest money is this is one of the seller's obligations in the contract to meet. And if they don't meet this, then it can be called a default. And we'll go down and look at the default section here in a second. But let's look at these seller's disclosures. Most people do not understand, or they don't respect this enough to treat it seriously. So they look at seller's disclosures and they look at line A, and it's a written seller property condition disclosure for the property. By the way, this is required by state law, not necessarily this seller property condition disclosure, but it is required by law that a seller disclose everything that could be a material fact about the property. And material fact is defined not as we think of material as something that I can hold on to. It's defined as everything that could affect my decision to purchase the property, the price that I'm willing to pay for it. So obviously, if there's flaws in the property, that would affect that, right? So that's required by law. You can't hide things. You can't paint over a ceiling that's leaked and is stained yellow. You can't paint over it and hide it. It's required by law. So it is required that we disclose these things, but there's a lot more that's required. Now, most agents, they're going to know that there's this long, and our association, our state association of realtors, has helped create this long, complex, not terribly complex, but enough that it protects most sellers. And it's a questionnaire. It's like 15 pages that they can go through and fill out their seller's disclosures, right? However, that isn't all that there is to it for a seller to be compliant with this. They've also got to have a lead-based paint disclosure. If the property was built prior to 78, they've got to provide the commitment for title insurance as referenced in section 6.1. So we go up here to 6.1. And that tells us how we need to provide title insurance. And it is not unheard of, but a little bit less rare that we get this commitment for title insurance included with the seller's disclosures. So right away, a lot of sellers, if they don't understand that simple aspect, they're going to be in default, right? And then it gets more complicated. We've got to have a copy of the CCNRs, a copy of the minutes, the budget, the financial statement, a copy of any existing lease agreements or short-term rental bookings, a copy of any property management agreements that you have in place, evidence of any water rights or water shares. And guys, sometimes you put a home on the market and you get offers pretty quickly, or it's a for sale by owner and they're not aware of these things, or it's an agent that's not as experienced and they haven't gone to work getting these things in place. And you get an offer and they give you a fairly quick seller disclosure deadline. Sometimes it's just a couple of days and you don't have this stuff together. You're not going to get all of this stuff, all of this information in a couple of days, which means if you accepted that offer with $20,000 earnest money and you didn't get those things put together, then we jump down here to the default section. And if the seller defaults, the buyer can elect one of the following: cancel the purchase contract. That's the REPC, real estate purchase contract. And in addition to giving their earnest money back, so they get their $20,000 back because you, as the seller, defaulted, they give that money back to you at an equivalent amount in liquidated damages. So if I see $20,000 versus $5,000, I'm going to go through here and I'm going to make darn sure that I've got all my ducks in a row. If I'm representing the seller or if I am the seller, I need to make very certain that I've got all of this stuff ready to go. All right. And if I don't, then the buyers who wrote the offer, they gave me a seller disclosure deadline of just a couple of days. I might like that $20,000 offer, but I need to make sure that I've got those things ready. If I don't have them ready, I need to counter this with an adjusted seller disclosure deadline that gives me the time to meet the requirements of this contract so that I'm not in default. So that is the first thing that I want to talk about. I went 7 minutes. My goal was 5 minutes. I always do that. It's okay. Hopefully the understanding is valuable to you. But simply seeing a large amount in earnest money there does not necessarily make it a better offer. You need to have an in-depth understanding of all the different terms in the purchase contract to understand it. And this is only one thing. I'm going to do a second video where I talk about the second part of this, that after acceptance, the buyer and seller in receipt of earnest money is, where it's held, so it says it's going to deposit it into the broker's trust account. I'll make that an earnest money part 2 video, but this will be our part 1 video. Is when you're talking earnest money, have a deep understanding of the entire contract. Don't just look at that dollar amount and say this one's better than that one. Hopefully that helps. Thanks, guys.